let's get this done and let's get this over with quickly here. The French and Indian War, very important factor leading up to the American Revolution. And we will talk about it right now. Here is a map of North America in 1750. You've got the French claims, the British claims, the Russian claims. We don't talk about the Russians much, do we? But they're way out. And that will change a lot by 1763. So let's talk about the 7 Years' War. In North America, it's the French and Indian War. In Canada, they just call it the 7 Years' War. Like if you took a history class in Canada, they would call it the 7 Years' War still. It starts in North America, actually started by George Washington. It spreads globally. You see here a map of the various allies. Right on the one hand, Britain, Prussia, Hanover. I mean, come on, what are these? A joke? What are these countries? Britain, Prussia, Hanover, France, Austria, Sweden, Saxony. This relates again to in my part one of this lecture, the idea of German identity. Right, we're talking like Hanover is on one side of this battle and Saxony is on the other. These are like old-fashioned. These are countries that belong in AP World, that you just stay in AP World. Right? We want like regular countries in American history. So anyway, those are the two sides. It introduces a kind of American-style warfare in North America, not in Europe. But it's the colonials, right, have taken this up from Native Americans, and you get on both sides, right, both the French and the English are using kind of American style or native style attacks. There's still some of the old style too. Doesn't work that well. We'll learn about that. Okay, so George Washington, again, still at it with the Ohio River Valley. The French want it. The English want it. They both have competing claims. The French are like there. They've been there for a very long time. So in terms of like legitimacy of a claim, finders keepers, I don't know. Washington disagrees. 1754, he marches into the area to claim rights to it. They get in a firefight. The troops surrender. It's not a great, Washington's in his early to mid, maybe 23 or something, very young. Doesn't go that well for him. He'll come back later in a different role. The Albany Congress is something that the British officials call. It is an intercolonial Congress for defense against France. They say, hey, you colonials, get your act together, get some volunteers so that we can get people on the front lines ASAP and not have to ship over all these troops. Curiously, this background image is super famous, right? Join or Die. It is created and published by Benjamin Franklin. People misremember this as has something to do with the American Revolution. The Gadsden flag, sure. But this image, if you ever see this, and it's like a really like top 10 image for APUSH, I don't know why it's not in your book. Not yet. Maybe it's in a later chapter. This Franklin makes to garner support for the Albany Congress, not for the American Revolution. Right, and we see here, right, the New England, New York, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, obviously, right, the message join or die being quite obvious. We'll talk more about this image in class, obviously, when we talk about the Revolution, but very important to don't misremember this image, as this is not an American Revolution image. This is a French and Indian War image, 1754 image. Okay. So Ben Franklin, he's not just making, cutting up snakes and printing them. He thinks that the Albany Congress is a good opportunity to, let's give the British what they want and let's muster some troops. But let's see if we can get a little bit more home rule, right? Maybe now's the time. He proposes what he calls the Albany Plan of Union. It does succeed in getting people to volunteer to defend the colonies. Doesn't succeed with the home rule bit, so fails in that attempt. Very important that only 7 of the 13 continental colonies show up. So not everyone is showing up here. This is relevant because we will see At the First Continental Congress, we'll have more colonies. In the Second Continental Congress, you have more colonies. So the idea that you can go from 7 colonies in 1754 to later 9 of the colonies to eventually all 13 shows us an increasing sense of unity, right? That it's not just like we are 13 disparate, separate colonial entities, but rather we're forging a common identity. Very important. They join. They don't die. Braddock, Edward Braddock, not good at it. He is sent to Virginia. He's an old school kind of military tactician. Not very effective. Doesn't work. It's kind of a boondoggle. The war expands. The British launch an invasion of Canada. So the British are fighting all over the world, right? They're fighting the French in the Caribbean. They're fighting in the Indian Ocean. They're fighting in Canada. They invade Canada. William Pitt, when he takes charge, he says, let's just focus on Canada. Let's not spread our resources thin all over the whole globe. Let's focus on the French colony where there's not that many people, right? We learned about New France. We learned how they couldn't get people to go. It hasn't changed that much. There's still fewer people, where the West Indies, because of all of the French colonial possessions like Haiti, or Saint-Domingue, I guess at this point, they're making tons of money off these colonies, and they have enormous enslaved populations. So that's where all their military is. Why are we fighting them in the West Indies? Let's focus on Canada. And let's pour money at the problem, is the other thing Pitt does. He chooses younger leaders over older ones, and it works. The tide starts to turn at Louisbourg near Nova Scotia. That's like way out, right? The far east part of what is now Canada. In Quebec, they also win at the Battle of Quebec, 1759. Both generals die, but they win. This sets the stage for more wins down the line. We're not going to get into the military history of the French and Indian War. No one cares, right? Albany, what started it? Ohio River Valley, Albany Plan of Union, cut up Snake, and it ends with the Peace of Paris in 1763. That's it. That's all you need to know. But it's really important to know that because it sets the stage for some of the kind of colonial beefs that follow, right? England gets all the French land in New France, so they're gone, right? The French are gone. In terms of like a political power, a lot of French people remain in like Quebec, but Paris is no longer in charge. They lose territory all over the place. Spain also loses territory, but they gain also by making a deal with England to give England Florida in exchange for the Louisiana Territory. As far as English are concerned, west of the Mississippi River might as well be Russia, right? It's like way, way far away. What they want is, right, access to or contiguous colonies all the way down the coast. So they trade Florida for Louisiana. And then this is the side-by-side, the difference from 1750 to 1763. France will get the Louisiana Territory back. We don't need to worry about what kind of backroom deals happen there. But obviously by 1803, Thomas Jefferson doesn't buy the Louisiana Territory from Spain. Right? He buys it from France. More on that in the next chapter. Okay, the immediate effect on Britain, the colonials, and Native Americans. We can forget about France. I'm sorry, every time I think of like British stuff in this time period, I think of this Sign of the Beef Carver. It was a small chain restaurant in like the Detroit area, and I always think of like that guy being the quintessential British colonial authority, right? With the knife and fork. Obviously, kind of a big deal. You finally beat France. You've been fighting them like since time immemorial, and you finally beat them. That's kind of a big dub there. But Pitt, as I said, pours money at the problem. They've been in debt because they've been fighting for a very long time. And it's not as though they just have money in the bank. They're taking on debt to pay for all of these wars. So they've got more debt now. In their interactions with the colonial volunteers and the soldiers, the British really see them as like, they're really bumpkins, right? They're provincial, they're cowardly, they don't want to defend themselves, they don't have the kind of regimented order of the British troops, so they kind of begin to look down on these colonials, right? That's important. Because if we look at the other side, something very different is happening here. The colonies unite. There's nothing like a war to unite a group of people that previously did not see themselves as necessarily connected, right? So they begin to get a sense of like, look, we did this. We fought the French and we won, and we were doing a lot of the fighting, right? The colonists. They get military experience. It's invaluable to actually have real military experience, actually be in a battle, and then if you survive, right, to take that experience into another conflict is really invaluable. They see the British tactics as ineffective, right? So they think all this, musket shot, lining up, this kind of old-fashioned, doesn't work for Braddock. Ask him how it worked out. They think that their style is the one that's going to win the day, and they begin to begin to think of themselves as like, yeah, like we're different, like we're different. Again, especially getting all this contempt from the British, right, of being bumpkins or whatever. They're more apt to step into this identity, right, of a marginalized group, which, imagine, right? But in 1763, the Americans are kind of like, they feel as though they're being marginalized. Native Americans got it really rough, right? They lose their French allies. They can't play one side against the other. Britain is the only game in town. Americans begin pouring over the Appalachian Mountains. A lot of conflict there. In the West, right, the Louisiana Territory, not much changes. Day-to-day life doesn't change that much at first, right? Because the French fur trappers are still there. Their old alliances are still there. The trade networks are still there. Because Paris isn't in charge anymore, it doesn't really change your life if you live along the Mississippi or west of the Mississippi. Until, because of, right, the domino effect of English colonists pouring into lands in the East, a lot of native groups in the East begin to push west, and then you have all of these, there's a whole history of warfare that isn't part of the APUSH curriculum, but as the United States is pushing west, they're displacing Native American societies, and they're coming into conflict with other groups, so there's all this fighting, right, to the west, and that does eventually, right, affect the lives of Native groups. Pontiac's uprising, right, Peace of Paris is 1763. Pontiac's rebellion or Pontiac's uprising, same year. He's an Ottawa chief. He is not happy with what's happened. He sees the English moving in. They organize. They attack settlers. They kill a lot of them. 2,000 people killed is a lot. But superior firepower, superior numbers. The British do fairly quickly put down the rebellion. But they realize we can't do this. Right, we're going to go to war with, worst case scenario, we're going to be back at war with France. Best case scenario, we're going to have these ongoing warfare with Native American groups. We literally can't afford it, right? So what do? The proclamation line of 1763. Again, we haven't left 1763, Peace of Paris, Pontiac's uprising, proclamation line, all 1763. You see the line here in the background. It's basically just west of the Appalachian Mountains. You can't cross, the British say. It's meant to separate colonists from the Native American groups. This is something that's been happening all the way back. Right? That's what Bacon's Rebellion was about, right? Poor freeholding or smallholding or yeoman farmers on the frontier want cheap land. The cheap land is over there. The cheap land is the Native Americans' land, because you risk dying because like they want to keep their land. So they're going to like fight to protect it. So this has been an ongoing thing. The British say we can't do this, right? Just like Lord Berkeley did in the 1670s. The British say, here's a line, can't cross it. They actually remove colonists who are west of the line forcibly remove squatters and people who have ostensibly purchased the land, although the deed claims are not valid. Americans really don't like it, right? What's the point? Like, we got all this land. It's ours now. It's British land. Why are you protecting it? Again, the bigger geopolitical consequences are not relevant to the poor yeoman farmer on the frontier, right? They want the land. They're willing to commit genocide against Native Americans for the land. They're all in. The British, it's not that they, right, care about, the life, liberty, and property of the Native American groups, but they do care about not going to war with France again, and they also care about not having an ongoing conflict on the frontier. Cost the British a lot of money. You see here William Pitt's leadership, just throw money at the problem. They win, but it is a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, right? A victory at such a great cost that it really raises the question of, was it worth it? The colonies are going to pay, right? Why not? We invested all of this, Britain says. Why not? We invested all of this money to protect you, right? We fought in the Americas. You guys started it. So why wouldn't you pay your fair share? What does someone in Leicester or Edinburgh care about the French and Indian War, right? You started it. You pay up. They're going to have to pay more. And then, of course, to conclude, right, ... This is it's not the only factor, but it's a major factor in stirring the kind of emotions up of the colonists that, like, the British government is more concerned with protecting Native American land claims than they are protecting British citizens. They're giving us all of these unfair taxes. They're making us pay for all of this administration and defense. And when we say defense, we mean more British soldiers on the street, on the frontier, in colonial capitals. So it raises the question for colonists, why are they here? Right? Are they here to protect us from Native Americans, or are they here to point back at us and keep us in line? Right? And this paranoia starts to grow. It is one of the factors that leads to, intellectually and emotionally at least, colonists wanting to have a bit more freedom, right? They don't want revolution yet. It's like really early, 1764. Very few people are talking about revolution, but they want more freedom. They want more representation. They want a say in their own government, right? They want to be more British, not less British, which is how they feel. That is all for the French and Indian War and for period 2.